welcome. My name is Chris Ajemian. I'm the CEO and founder of CATES Tutoring and Educational Services and one of your co-hosts for today. Welcome to our newest episode of Inside College Admissions, How to Navigate the Common App in the Age of COVID-19. I'm once again have the extreme pleasure of being joined by Michael Muska, my dear friend and mentor, who has worked in admissions offices at Brown, Cornell, Oberlin, and many, many others, and now runs Relativity College Counseling. Michael, how you doing? Thanks so much for being here. Feeling good?
I'm good. I finally was able to get a haircut, so that was the most.
Look at this. Look at this. Same here. Same here.
You look so much better.
The two of us, right?
Yes.
We're getting pretty shaggy a few weeks ago.
Oh, yeah, that we were. Yes.
So some housekeeping as people are jumping onto the call. I'm going to facilitate today's discussion. To borrow like a sports metaphor, I'll be doing the play-by-play and Michael will be doing the color commentary, if you will. If you have any questions at any point, you want to actually put them in the Q&A panel, which you can find by scrolling down over the bottom of your screen. Additionally, for the best experience, you may want to set your screen to gallery view, which you can do by scrolling over the right top corner of your screen and selecting gallery. And you also may want to click view options, which should be at the top of your screen. And if you select side-by-side mode, when we sort of jump out of the slides and just sort of do like the talking heads thing, you'll be able to see Michael and I sort of, next to one another. And that's usually, the most dynamic experience for the audience. So here's our agenda for today, short but deep. So we'll be talking about COVID-19 admissions updates, a lot to discuss here. We'll be talking about the Common Application. We're going to actually bring you inside the Common App and give you a tour of it, give you some expert insights, talk about what people are usually looking for in terms of all the different pieces of it. Then we'll take a quick peek at the college supplements for some different schools, just to kind of show you how to kind of again, navigate your way around it. We'll give you some insights there. And then we're going to do a short checklist of things that you should be doing now, as well as a Q&A. And then we have a special offer for the end of our webinar. So it's a lucky day. All right, cool. Again, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A panel rather than the chat thread at the bottom of your screen. And also, if you have any questions and you want to contact us directly, either because we didn't address the question or because it's a private question, here's the contact information for both Michael and for us at the CATES team. And again, you're always welcome to reach out with any question. We're very, very happy to answer any question that you may have regarding some of these, sort of fluctuations and nuance and details in the college admissions process, especially during COVID-19. So, Michael, without any further ado, would love to know what some of the real important updates are for admissions that you're hearing, and I can talk a little bit about testing. So, what do we got?
Well, I think one of the things we have to really be paying attention to is the changes day to day. I mean, just yesterday, Princeton just announced that they are eliminating early action, and they're only going to go to regular decision applications. That could start off a trend. Harvard and Yale normally do a lot of what Princeton does, so we just have to wait and see what happens with that. Yesterday, Bowdoin announced that they were not going to have fall sports. That's going to have a huge impact perhaps on the NESCAT, the New England Small School Athletic Conference, which includes all these great schools like, Williams and Amherst and Wesleyan and Trinity. Who knows what's going to happen in that league. If now one of them has decided they're not going to compete, that's going to be, there's going to be ramifications in terms of that. So I think in a lot of ways, make sure you're on top of the news. You have somebody you're working with who is on top of these kinds of things, because it's not even July 1st, and a lot is going to happen between July 1st and September 1st, both for students who are upcoming seniors and also for students who are currently ready to go to college to pay attention to what's going on with their operations. I mean, a lot of schools are still trying to figure out, will they teach online? Will they teach some courses online? Will they split and limit the number of students they can have on campus? I spoke with a student at Columbia the other day, an incoming student at Columbia, who has said point blank, they are making them live in single rooms. So in other words, you will not have a roommate, so, wow. Which is difficult, obviously, in terms of space and numbers and making it work. but colleges are doing it. Columbia's solution was to not let the graduate students move on campus right away, which opened up more rooms for the undergraduates. So every college right now is going to have different ways of dealing with what's going on. So as juniors going to senior year, pay attention to this, because there's going to be lots of impacts on you guys.
Yeah, and just to sort of add to that, with the testing landscape right now, it's sort of amazing. It's incredible how much has changed just since you and I started doing these talks about, like, what, 8-10 weeks ago. So College Board, canceled its plans for at-home testing, in no small part due to some of the difficulties that they faced, I think, with the AP exams back in May. They saw that they were coming up against issues with respect to access, especially with a longer form test like the SAT. Delivering an exam like that that's consistent and sort of equitable is a pretty tall order. And so they canceled plans to do that. And then I think, like, literally the very next day, Columbia and Dartmouth both came out saying they're going to be going test optional. And that really was the big domino, right? That was the first huge domino to fall with respect to how testing has changed over the last, couple of weeks. And, and now, the only school that seems to be sort of holding out on not making the SAT or the ACT optional right now is MIT. Although MIT has forever gotten rid of the SAT subject tests. They thought that was not, they thought that was a barrier to entry for a lot of students who didn't have access to subject tests. And it was sort of interesting. And then also finally, with the respect to, how is all this maybe impacting admissions, I was talking to one of my professors at the Harvard Education School over the weekend. And he said, because of the geographic concerns and people couldn't travel to Harvard to take some summer classes, they actually had an uptick of 17% in their online student enrollment. So whether it's issues related to geography or the fact that exams are no longer a barrier to entry for some students, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw an increase of about, say, 20%, 25% at some of these schools next year with applications, just because the SATs are no longer required. Michael, what's your thought on that particular
point? I think another piece of that in particular, Chris, is I urge people to look and read the wording of the different websites of the schools they're thinking about. Even though the 8 Ivies have pretty much made the situation test optional for this coming year, in their writing, they basically say, however, if you're in an area where you should be able to take the test and you want to take the test and submit it, that's going to put a student perhaps at an advantage. I mean, the reality is a student who can submit scores that are very strong scores, give them another thing that the school can use to evaluate that applicant on. The concept, however, is that it's going to be difficult for a lot of people to take tests this coming year, particularly international students, and also students that are probably in some rural or remote parts of the US. Arizona is a great example right now. The COVID-19 is really starting to really hit that state. They're going to have to do some crackdowns that states like New York and New Jersey are beyond right now. So I think we have to really pay attention where you are, what's going on, and how each of the different schools is dealing with it.
And that reminds me of one more point, which is, as far as testing goes, right now, testing is happening in some places, right? And one of the places where it's happening is if your school is normally a test site, there's a chance that your school will in fact hold your test in the fall. Right now in the UK, there are schools like the American School of London that are holding the ACT for their students, but some of the more public testing centers like the Iranian Center, where a lot of students take their ACT exams on the computer, they're not allowing students. So it also might come down to whether your school is a testing center to begin with, and if not, the public testing centers may not be available to you. So again, we'll be talking more about this over the coming weeks. But Mike, let's get into sort of the fun stuff here and talk a little bit about admissions. So just so we're all on the same page, I'm going to quickly cover the admissions criteria for roughly most schools. Here it is kind of in order. So number one, transcripts. That means your grades and the rigor of the classes that you took. If you're an international student in either the IB program or the A-level program, it's going to be your predictions, right? 2, test scores. SAT, ACT subject tests and AP exams. Of course, in the age of COVID-19, this is a big question mark. 3, there's your resume, so all your clubs, your sports, your activities, internships, passion projects. 4, teacher recommendations and your counselor recommendations. 5, the essays, your personal essay, additional information essay, your supplemental essays, and then also the interview. And as you know, as Michael taught me, the way that admissions offices sort of evaluate your application, it's like a fancy dinner party. Your grades get you through the door, your test scores get you a seat at the table. It's all, and then it's all the personal quality assets, right? The resume, recommendations, the essays, and interview. That's what comes them to ask you to stay for dinner. So, Michael, anything you want to say about the admissions criteria and how COVID-19 may have changed things up?
Well, I mean, we're going to talk more about it, but obviously, certainly the resume piece is totally affected by COVID-19 in terms of what kids have been able to do, in terms of that particular piece. And I think the recommendations are going to really be key this year, because teachers and your counselor will talk about what did you do during the spring when the school was dealing with COVID-19. And I think the teachers who can really talk in terms of the kinds of positive things that you did during that period of time will be really key. Essays will continue to be important as they always were. Test scores may be a little bit less important as they have been in the past. But, you know, again, if you've got a good test score, put it in there.
So just one thing that I want to point out to people, a really good resource for you is this PDF. And what this PDF is, it's actually the summary ruling on the lawsuit that was filed by the Students for Fair Admissions, who thought that Harvard University, really the Harvard College admissions process was discriminating against some groups, particularly Asian groups. The judge who ruled said that Harvard was not discriminating against any groups, and in fact, they were doing an admirable job of making admissions and access to Harvard fair for all. But what's really kind of cool about this document is that on page 18, they actually bring you through the reading procedures. So all the things that, you know, Michael and I just sort of talked about, it's really here, literally in black and white. So pages 18 through 31, you can learn about how Harvard literally goes about its admissions process. And you have to think that other schools around the country probably follow a similar process. So again, it's this, again, the summary ruling. We're going to send it out with the follow-up email to this. But if you sort of Google, you know, Harvard lawsuit ruling PDF, you'll find it on the internet. Okay, cool.
And reading through it, Chris, it's very similar. What Harvard is doing is very similar to what we did at Brown when I was there. I'm sure in the Ivy League, you're going to see this kind of committee process in terms of holistic review of the application being very, very common in terms of the very top schools, no question. One thing I wanted to add too is, we haven't mentioned this, in the California system, we're not talking about specific systems that much today, but the state legislature of California has just ruled that they will now factor in a student's racial background. And that was not part of the California system for a number of years when the citizens of the state voted that affirmative action could not be part of the admissions process. That's now going back into the California system. That will be a huge difference in terms of the number of students of color who were admitted, but could also impact the number of students they will now take from out of state, okay? Because that will start to fill up their class more.
Nice. That's a great point, Michael, and thanks for bringing that up, because obviously there's a lot of people who are on this call who are thinking about California schools. So we're now going to go inside the Common App. And what we're looking at here is a Common App account that I have created. It's a dummy account. The email is kateszoom1@gmail.com. I cannot give you my password, but you'll see here in the Common App, and you'll get here by just sort of Googling Common App or going to commonapp.org. You know, there's a first year and there's also a transfer student. So if you're a rising senior, you're doing the first year student. So we're going to sign in and we're going to sort of walk you through this and show you what you want to be doing. All right. So when you log in, you come up to this dashboard, and obviously this dashboard is here. I've already sort of created my account, right? You have, at the top, it'll say welcome name. You'll have your CA ID, which is your Common App ID number. You want to write that down somewhere. It's always accessible here, but you want to write it down somewhere because it could be useful, right, Michael? If you're, say, you know, trying to email admissions or talk to admissions, having that ID is helpful, right?
Absolutely, no question. Yep.
Yeah, so we have our dashboard here. I've added some schools. You'll notice here that the deadlines have passed because the Common App hasn't updated just yet. Common App normally updates on August 1st. But you have your dashboard tab. You've got your My Colleges tab, which is just another way of looking at your college is in a hamburger menu. We'll talk about this in a little bit. Then you have the actual Common App is this tab. We're going to come here next. You've got your college search. So if you want to say search for a college, you go here into your field and you say, I don't know, do like Brown, it comes up. You press that button, it adds it to your list. And over here, you've also got the financial aid resources. And there's just a whole kind of litany of links and information here with respect to aid offers, negotiating, and planning for college costs. But let's go over here to the Common App. And let's sort of get into sort of the nitty gritty of this. So we're going to walk through this, and again, I'll be doing the play-by-play, and then Michael, who's just been on many committees, he's going to sort of give us sort of insights and color on what some of these details may tell admissions. But just like number one, we have to make sure that our entire application is well organized and coherent. Right? It's one of the things, Michael, that you have said to me just in general about the Common Applications, that it wants to read like an exciting story. A narrative event. You want to take them to some place, some experience, right? So that you want to sort of show them that you're the applicant that they've always been dreaming of, right? What would you have to say about that, just in general?
No, I think what's important is you want to also think about what's the theme of your application. In other words, what are the things you're going to talk about? What are the things you're passionate about? Is that reflected in your activities? Will your teachers and your college counselor, when they write the recommendation, talk about that as well? So the more that you can make this a collective group that comes together in terms of telling a story, I think that's a great way of approaching it, Chris.
Yeah, and I remember conversations years ago, Michael, you talked about the tone of sort of humble bragging. I think students don't realize this is really your opportunity to advocate for yourself, yeah?
This is not a time to be shy. We'll talk a little bit later in terms of thinking about where you can attach perhaps, something that you've done in terms of quality paper that you've written, maybe perhaps an activity that you want to highlight that you've got somewhere, so these are opportunities. Again, this is not a time to be shy. And I think for a lot of students, who are very, not as self-confident as others, this is the time to do it. And we talked about it when we talked about the interview. It's the same thing. The application process is the time to really let them know who you are.
Right. And the other thing too is remember that no person is perfect. And if anything, sharing your vulnerabilities, sharing your imperfections actually makes you more relatable, which allows your story to really kind of resonate with the real people who are reading this applications.
And in many ways, there are actually a couple of the prompts in the Common App essay even talk to that. So as you're looking at the different prompts of the Common App essay, there may be one that you catch that really catches your attention because, boy, that resonates with me.
Right. So here in the profile section, you'll see that there's these different kind of blue bars and there are all these different sort of drop downs. One thing that I want to sort of point out is that there's a lot of fields in the Common App. You do not need to fill out all of them. It's only the ones that have the red star. That's where you're required to fill something in. So don't spend too much time worrying about whether or not you should put your middle name in because it's not required, right? That's number one, okay? And you'll see here that I'm being called CATES Zoom 1 because that's what I logged in as and created my profile as. And there's a couple of things here that I think are pretty interesting. There's a question here with respect to gender identity. They only give male and female currently as the gender options, but there is a space here if you want to describe your gender in different terms. Obviously, the address contact details are pretty, they're pretty straightforward. But there's also, Michael, would love to kind of hear your perspective on demographics and how to handle it, because demographics, they're not required. And if I look at some of the demographics here, American Indian or Alaskan Native, Asian, Black, or African American, Native Hawaiian, or other Pacific Islander, or white, for someone like me who's Armenian and comes from a Middle Eastern background, I don't see myself here, right? So what are your insights on that?
Well, I think one of the pieces, remember, and I think you had this earlier, that the only questions you have to answer are the ones with the red asterisk, okay? None of these questions fall into that category. So for example, a student who doesn't want to talk about their religious preference, no reason to do that. There's no reason, if you want to leave this question blank, you can do that. You can also use the opportunity on the last page of the Common Application to be an opportunity and a place to say, by the way, I didn't check that box, but I wanted to explain my background a little bit more to you so you have a better context of who I am.
Right. And over here, Michael, on the language, what do you recommend to people when they maybe speak multiple languages. You know, the way that I often advise people is that you want to put whatever language is spoken at home first, right? And then add your other sort of language competencies. And, you know, if you're able to get around an airport or order a meal or like, you know, navigate a city in directions, to me, that's actually proficient. What do you advise?
I agree. I mean, absolutely. You know, a student that can show multiple proficiency as a linguist is going to be seen in a very positive light by a university. And you're absolutely right. You know, like I would not say I am fluent in French, but I can certainly get around France if I go over there. I know how to get from the airport to the city, how to get around the city, navigate. I don't really want to get into a long, in-depth conversation, but I can order food. You know, so I think as long as you're capable of showing a degree of proficiency, I think that's really important. So yes.
Right. And here over here in citizenship, we see this question a lot, especially international applicants. So Michael, when people have multiple, say, passports, what do you normally advise that they do with respect to, you know, which passport or citizenship to sort of show or to share or apply with, as I sometimes hear?
You know, I think the reality of this question is, you know, whatever one you're comfortable with, but remember that your application is going to be reviewed in the context of the high school you're coming from. Right. So in other words, you know, so what if you have a British passport, but you're going to high school in the United States all your life? You know, so it's nice you have it, great, but at the same time, the concept of your citizenship is going to be much more important in terms of an international student who comes to the United States and goes to a private school here in the United States is going to be looked at the context of the high school they're in, not based on their citizenship.
Got it. Also, for anyone here who has a social security number, it's not required. Don't put it in. I always say to students that the more you can sort of protect your SSN or social security number, the better.
Absolutely.
Also, at the top of the Common App, top right of each of these different sort of application sort of areas, you have a preview, and so this just kind of gives you a preview of
what the colleges will see. That page is what the colleges will actually be looking at. Okay, that's right. Yeah.
Right. So as we get into some of these other sort of other categories of the Common App, I'll probably be using this function just to kind of make our time efficient. Okay. All right. So family. So Michael, I always find that students have a really hard time. It's always an interesting moment when you ask the student to go, ask their parents when they graduate from school, what degrees they have. For some reason, it takes longer for them to come back with the information than you'd think, because sometimes students just don't know these things.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm amazed how many kids don't know where their parents went to college. You know, what's interesting, I think part of the context here is, I think there's two sides of this question. One side is colleges like to know the background you're coming from, and if you're coming from an educated family, there's going to be an expectation that you like to read, that you're a pretty good student. There's those kinds of issues. The other piece that colleges really put a lot of attention to is a student that we call a first generation student, a student whose mother and father perhaps didn't go to college and has really succeeded, in spite of who they live in with their family, that it's a really positive comment about the student, how they've prospered and really achieved, perhaps not without as much support as a family where both parents went to college. So I think that, in many ways, there's a plus on both sides of it.
Yeah, and I think from a narrative standpoint, you're talking earlier about this idea of what's your story, what's your narrative, is that, obviously we learn about you as a person in the profile, but really now we're starting to learn more about the context you come from. And this is really kind of beginning to start to paint the background of who you are, where your upbringing has been, which really kind of sets the framing for the rest of the application.
What's interesting, I just finished reading the book Educated, and there's a fascinating story of a kid who basically homeschooled herself in terms of getting into college, but was always embarrassed to talk about it. She didn't want anybody to know her background and what she had overcome. In many ways, that which just made her more impressive if schools had been able to know that.
Right. So speaking of Educated, we're now in the education tab here. And again, I'm just doing the preview here. You'll see that I did graduate from Southside High School. Michael Muska was my college counselor. He wasn't, but I'm making him for today.
I've never been in class at high school yet.
Michael, this is interesting. There's this change in progression piece. And I'll go back. I want to show this to people because there might be some students who have changed, right, over here, right, who changed high schools during their high school experience. And that then triggers a change in progression, or what used to be called the education interruption essay, 250 words. Can you talk talk about that for a moment?
Well, I think a lot of it is also, it can be a very positive thing. Mom and dad moved, you had no choice, okay? But there could be times where a student leaves a school because they don't feel they're being challenged enough. And they go to a school where they get to have classes like AP classes or IB curriculums. A kid who leaves a freshman, sophomore year school and goes to an IB program for their junior and senior year, boy, to me as an admission person, that's great to see the kid challenge themselves. So that's a great opportunity to talk about in a very positive way why you made the change, or if it's family circumstances that caused it, that's perfectly appropriate as well too.
Right, and in a situation with the Common App where there's word limits, right, word count, having that extra 250 words to sort of tell our story, express our story can be really valuable. So you'll see here too that you may be able to, well, you can list any sort of colleges that you have gone to, say summer programs and gotten credit. When I was in high school, I actually did a Boston College summer program. I wound up going there for my undergraduate, but like if I was applying, I'd probably list it over here. Also saves you from listing on your activities, which we'll look at in a few moments. As far as the academic information, the only thing that's required for you to report is the number of students in your high school class. You don't need to report your GPA. You don't need to do any of that. Michael, I often say to students, unless your grades are like super stellar, it's probably best for that information to be sent and communicated through the transcript. Would you agree, or do you give different advice?
There are a lot of schools that no longer rank. So in that situation, no reason to certainly include that. A lot of schools don't even complete GPAs any longer. So there's no GPA perhaps in the situation as well too. It's basically going to be determined by what your school does. And a lot of schools do different things. Some schools will rank and they'll put you into quintiles or deciles, but they will not give you an exact number as well too. So, again, it's what does your school do that is going to be given to the colleges in that particular, let your college counselor deal with that, not you.
Right. So when it comes down to listing our current or most recent year courses, if you're maybe a gap year student, I often advise that you do your most rigorous class in your primary interest first. So like, for example, if you're like a math wizard, maybe AP Calculus BC goes here. And then the second most rigorous, then maybe it's AP Physics C, so on and so forth. And then, so there's a bit of a hierarchy from like, most rigorous down to maybe least rigorous. And sometimes for students, they may be taking a different English class or history class, first semester or second semester. So that might kind of change. But again, we want to start off with like the most rigorous and then kind of take it from there. Michael, any other insights or ways of approaching this?
Well, a lot of it also is as colleges are looking to fill their classes, a student who lists English and history first at a school that is looking for, Johns Hopkins, for example, right. They got plenty of kids with math and science as their top double classes, but they have a great history and political science program. So if you're interested in those areas and you list those as your top classes and the rest of your application kind of builds into that story, then that's another reason to think about the order and how you put the courses exactly. Yeah.
Right. And I'll also take this opportunity to mention that, once you fill out the common application, you send it to one school, your application is no longer locked. A couple of years ago, it was locked and students have to create multiple common app accounts. That's no longer necessary. You could literally, write one common application and maybe change the list of your courses for 5 of them, and then, send 5 different kind of applications, and you can send, edit, send, and edit, just so everyone's aware of that. And then the same thing over here with the honors. With your honors, you're able to list, international, national, state, regional, and school awards. What I've done here is I would normally recommend to people that you start with your most impressive honor in terms of level and years. If you look at my actual entries into the Common App, this will actually be an international. Okay, so for me, it went international, national, state, and school, and you'll see too for however long I was doing it. That's kind of how I organized it. Just so again, it was the most impressive all the way down to relatively the least impressive. And then if you have multiple awards, like for example, I have a student right now who has won like the history award twice, as well as the English award and a Spanish award. He has more than 5. There's only 5 entries for this honors section. So what I'll do for him is I'll say, be like, school awards, and then colon, like, Spanish, history, English, and have the years in, say, parentheses. Michael, anything to add here about how to handle the honors section?
I guess the only caution I would say is I certainly have run into a number of students who can't fill in those 5 lines, you know? So again, don't feel terrible if you only can fill in 3 of the 5 lines, okay? You know, don't say, oh my God, they're never gonna take me, because unlike this application here, you had something in all 5 spaces. That's not gonna be something that's gonna hurt you in the application. I think the quality is more important than the quantity. So in other words, if you've got some really impressive high honors from your school or your region, that will trump anything in terms of filling out all the spaces.
Agreed. And also, one thing too, there's something, there's something in America called the National Honor Society, but there's also something called like the National, like high school seniors honor society. There's actually 2 different ones, and one is a
anything you pay for
exactly
to get honored is going to be something that you don't want to put on your college application. Okay, so yes, you're exactly
right. Yeah, we got a message today asking, should I pay $75 to put the National Society of High School Scholars on? Or they're trying to do some, I'll say some blurry advertising with this, and the answer is probably.
Absolutely. Yeah.
If you're somebody who's worked with what's called a community-based organization, whether it's say like the POSSE program, or like in the UK, we run the US Sutton Trust program with US UK Fulbright Commission. If you are a part of one of those programs, there's an opportunity to put it in there. Also, future plans, which is technically an optional field. Michael, I always recommend that students actually do it. And there's 2 pieces to it. There's a role as well as your intended level of higher education. I always say that people put a master's program in, it's not a PhD. Michael, what do you think?
Absolutely, totally agree. And in many of these schools, as we were saying before, they really want to see what kinds of interests you have for the future. However, if you put down engineer and you haven't taken calculus, there's going to be a concern in terms, at Cornell, for example, if you haven't done, calculus BC, you're not even considered for the engineering school. So you have to look at what are the things that make sense in terms of who you are and what you want to do in the future. But yes, I absolutely agree. Putting something in there certainly makes good sense. Yes.
Right. And hopefully you guys can see this on the drop down, but this is kind of what it looks like. And if you don't see your profession here or what you want to do, there's also an other. Right. And then over here, if you're someone who is pursuing higher education and plan to, there's a few different options here. And so these are always good to kind of to include. All right, so now we'll go over now into the testing. But Michael, we're already starting to see, right, with the profile, and maybe the demographics and the language, as well as the family, the context, the education level of your family that you're coming from, the education background, the courses, the honors, maybe some colleges that you went to for college credit in the summer, your future plans, what your higher education goals are. We've already set a context.
Absolutely.
Right? We've already set a context.
I mean, even in the parent demographic, it's what they do for a living. That certainly could be something that a college will look at. When I was at Brown, and we had a student, in terms of we were looking at financial aid, back in those days, now they're need blind, but back in those days, we looked at what mom and dad did in terms of trying to project what we thought they would be able to afford for college. So I think those are, what as you said, everything you've put in it up until this point leads into what we're now going to talk about in terms of the activities and the essays as well too. Yeah.
Right. So normally as a testing person, pre-COVID-19, unless you've got super stellar, well, I'll put it to you this way. If you're planning to retake tests, I often say, leave the test taken or testing fields blank. Because what happens, you don't want to put test scores in there that you may not ultimately want to show until you know all your scores, right? So sometimes what might happen is students may apply, say, early action, early decision, and they're still taking exams. Again, I won't have them put it in here because they may want to send their application in. Most of the schools like to see scores sent directly from College Board or from ACT. Nevertheless, for the purposes of this webinar, I went ahead and I actually listed some scores. I just pretended I took the ACT and got some scores. I got my composite. You'll list the dates, right, that you took it. So here's the thing too. What I do like about listing your scores in the application, if you have taken the test multiple times, okay, this is actually your opportunity to show your best scores in like one place. And when they see your application, before they look at maybe the official test reports from SAT or from College Board or the ACT, you're already showing them your best scores. And so you're already kind of super scoring, right? And then for leaving exams, this is really for people taking the IB or the A levels. You can have your actual exam grades or even your appreciative exam grades here. Michael, anything you want to add?
I think what's important, what you just said about the ACT and the different components, even for schools, I mean, it's getting to the point now that pretty much everybody's going to super score. So having this really can help in that respect as well too. And so I think in a lot of ways, if it's a good score, put it in there. In the old days, when I was reading files, I didn't have the report from College Board yet or from ACT. Right. And the fact that it was in the application or in the teacher counselor's report gave me a better opportunity to read the file more completely earlier in the process. So lots of times things don't get together. Back in the old days, they used to come via paper and you had to get it into a file to match with the rest of the application. Nowadays, not as complicated, but still some systems aren't as efficient as others.
Now, Michael, I think one of the most underrated aspects of the application is the activities. Mm-hmm. I think there's an art to this, a science and art, an art and a science to this. And here's the thing, there's space for 10 activities. Fill in 10 activities. If you don't have 10 activities, okay, that's a conversation, but you really want to put in 10 activities if you can. And
Chris, the only caution I would say is in this year, because of what happened, there may have been activities that kids would have done or could have been able to do that they weren't able to do as well too. So I think that, yes, if you can get 10, that's great, but at what point are you stretching to get 10? But I'll have a kid put in babysitting, for example. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay. So, there'll be things that you don't think about. Oh, I would never put that in there. Oh, yes, that would be something that you would put in there.
So along those lines, if there's 10 spaces, I always recommend to people that the first 3 entries really set the tone for the activities list and really want to, if not introduce, reinforce really what your major themes are. So how could you go about doing that? Probably your most impressive, and I'll say, and meaningful accomplishment first, okay? Just because you, did a day at NASA doesn't mean it was also the most meaningful for you. It could be the most meaningful for you, right? But, what have you done over the long haul that's mattered to you that much, right? So you're looking at that, number one, and then your second, your third most, impressive or meaningful. And what I've done here is I've just sort of modeled for you what it might look like for you to put in an activity that takes the entire year. There are 52 weeks in a year, and you're going to have the option of of listing the number of weeks as well as the hours per week in your application. If you're doing a full year, I often recommend that you're doing 50 weeks because you got to probably take at least 2 weeks off. Now, of course, there are exceptions, but 50 weeks feels like a full year of work. A full school year of work, school years are usually about 40 weeks, but usually 36 weeks is probably closer to the truth because you're taking finals, you're taking midterms. So, and then the way that the activities get organized, there's career-oriented, there's academic, there's community service, there's a whole litany, okay? And you'll see here, I'll get into some more detail with that. So you have your first 3, right? There's always 150 characters to describe it. You want to probably do your best to use all 150 characters. This is not really a time to get into detail and nuance, to do about metrics, right? And numbers. You want to save nuance and detail and background for your essays. So you have your first 3, and then through the middle, I call it the middle of the body. These are what I call like the more like standard activities, okay? So like your athletics, maybe you're doing robotics, you're debating your speech, all right? Again, these are kind of like probably things you're doing in school, and then when you get to the last bit, the last 3 is what I call maybe like the last 2, depending on what your resume looks like. I call it like the accent pieces. Here it kind of showing some flair, showing something kind of cool, something kind of different. It might be like skateboarding. It might be something, that you play in a rock band or something like that. It might be a summer job or like Michael was saying, maybe you're a babysitter, maybe you're a caretaker for a family member. That goes into the activity as well. That's a significant activity. And then the last thing I'll say here before Michael provides us with his insights is if you have more than, 10 activities and you're able to kind of group them in themes, that's another way of using the activities list to express everything about you. So for example, I modeled it right here. I have summer work experience and internship in the finance sector. Maybe you were a shadow at Goldman Sachs in the M&A department for 3 weeks in 2020. Maybe you were a data analyst in the credit department at TD Bank for a week in 2019, and maybe you were a sales intern in the wealth management group at Morgan Stanley. Obviously, this is a very specific sector of the world and of the professional workforce, but it's just an example of how instead of listing things individually, you can sometimes group them if necessary. Michael, thoughts, input?
What's interesting to me on the internship piece you have there, kudos to you of how much can you say in 150 characters?
I love the challenge. It's one of my favorite pieces.
That is really a challenge for many students. They want to write all about what they have done, et cetera, and all of a sudden they get like 3 lines into it and they're got cut off. So you need to think about how you can express it in a very quality way. One of the examples I would use, though, to go back up towards the top in terms of these activities, is you might also want to think in how does it fit into your story. For example, a student who's applying to Tulane. Tulane cares so much about community service. Ever since Katrina, but even before Katrina, the whole concept of what have you done to help others? And to me, at a Tulane, I make community service my #1 activity. So you might want to think about perhaps what's going to resonate well with the college. Tulane has scholarships for students based on their community service record. So you want to think about when you're applying to particular schools, what might resonate a little bit more. For the kid who's an athlete, I don't think there's anything wrong if athletics is a little bit higher on this list than some other things, because the reality is the admissions office probably knows this is a recruited student athlete who's going to get support from the coach, and for the kid to not make it one of his most important activities when perhaps being so involved in sports has limited him to not be able to have 7, 8, 9, and 10, then you kind of want to have athletics that high on the list too. So it's going to vary from student to student in terms of how they do this. You want to talk through with somebody what makes sense in terms of the order of how I put them in.
And I'll just simply add that when we have somebody who has a full year activity, for 4 years, for 50 or 52 weeks, usually it is an athlete.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Someone who might be an Olympic track, right? Or who's, like you said, like a heavily recruited athlete, that is their most impressive and meaningful accomplishment.
Exactly. Yep. And the college.
So again, go ahead.
Yep. The college is going to know that because that kid is going to be on the coach's radar and the coach is knocking on the door of the admissions office about him. So yes.
Right. And so just to clarify, and I appreciate Michael's point, is that, I'm choosing these activity categories just as an example, right? Just as an example. This is just to illustrate, what it could look like for somebody. But again, it's a personal, it's going to be done per your personal strengths, as well as, like to Michael's point, maybe what the school's looking for. And so now, Michael, getting ourselves over here to the writing. We have our personal essay. We've always got our sort of 7 prompts, right? The last prompt is always write about whatever you want to write about, okay? We also have a disciplinary history prompt where if you were maybe expelled or, suspended for misconduct, you may want to write over here. I think what's interesting for this class of students is that anyone who may have been a part of like the climate walkout back in September 2019, most schools didn't suspend their students or discipline them, but in some cases, this is actually an opportunity, like you said earlier about education interruption, to actually build your story, turn it into a positive. And then there's always the additional information essay, which Michael, you and I both agree is a really, really critical part about providing extra context. I'll bring the preview up just with my sort of filler text. Michael, personal essay, you read a million of them. What makes them so good?
I think what's really important is you used the word before, Chris, story. And I think the context of the story that you tell in here is really, really critical. If you've got a passion about something that you really believe and you care in, talk about it, write about it, don't be afraid to do that, to talk about that. If you've had an experience in your life, I always tell the story, Chris, if you don't mind me sharing the story, but a student that we worked with a few years ago who wrote one of the most beautiful essays I've ever seen. Yeah. She wrote an essay about the fact that when she was growing up, her grandfather taught her a love of reading and that she would sit in his library with him and they would read together all the time. When her grandfather passed away, she went back to the library one day and she started looking at the books. And inside the books were notes from her grandfather to her. It was like he was still talking to her. He was still reading with her. You know,
So
this girl applied to Yale. It was one of the most beautiful essays I've ever read. And the dean at Yale called me and said he cried as well when he read the essay. I mean, it was just.
I'm getting misty. I just listened to it. It's amazing.
And you know, not every student has that kind of story, you know, but you know, every student has a story. Figure out what's the story that makes most sense. I had a student this year from China who grew up in the worst part of China, up in the upper northwest corner, where actually a lot of the Muslims are being imprisoned. And he moved away from there just because of how uncomfortable that area was. But he also was uncomfortable with the idea of the pollution in the area, what the place was like. And he decided he wanted to go in environmental science, and then he wants to be able to go back to China to make a difference when he goes back there, okay? Colleges love those kinds of essays in terms of experience, causing you to decide on a particular major, and then what you're gonna do with that major. So again, every story can be different, but make it a story about you.
And one thing I'll add to that is I feel like the personal essay or the personal statement, as some people call it, sort of frames the whole application. It's the core, right? It's the core and it's the frame. And what I think was really kind of fascinating about where the writing is placed in the Common Application, Michael, is that in many ways, the reader has gotten all this information about you, right? Your background, your family, your education, your testing, your activities. And in many ways, it's your essays that help to make sense of everything that's actually come before. It's really like the way that you can connect the dots and really sort of tie that narrative together.
Ironically, Chris, this is where I'm not necessarily disagree with you, but tell you a story. When I would read an application at Brown, I always read the essay first. I read the essay first to get a sense of the kid, to see if I liked them. And then I would turn back to the transcript and the test scores, because if I liked the kid, I was rooting for a really good transcript and really good test scores to support the fact that I really liked this kid in their essay. So admissions people can read the application. You're absolutely right. It's in order in the Common App, and that's traditionally how an admissions person might read it. But every admissions person has their own quirks, you know. And to me, I love to read the essay first.
Right, but again, to your point, I mean, it just shows like the power of a really strong personal statement.
Absolutely.
Right. So I'm also imagining too, when you were at Brown, if you didn't like what you read in the essay, I don't know if you went to the grades and to the test.
No, what I went was I saw the test scores or I saw the grades and I don't have to worry about this kid. I don't like him and the application's not very strong. But if a kid had a phenomenal essay or phenomenal story and I looked at it, you know, it gave me cause to say, I kind of want to fight for this kid when we go to committee. You know, I had a kid years ago, you know, back to the big list of activities you were on, who was from New Bedford, Massachusetts, and had no activities listed. And his college counselor didn't explain why. I called the college counselor. The kid was working 40 hours a week to support his family, okay? Yet he was number 2 in the class, okay? There was no question how much I was gonna fight to get that kid admitted. So again, the more that you can find out about an applicant, the better.
So Michael, this additional information essay, you and I are on the same page with this, but there are some students who I've worked with who their counselor at school has said that schools don't read this, that you shouldn't do too much with it. I don't know about that. What are your thoughts?
I mean, to me, it's the place, back to the activities. You got 150 characters and you want to say a whole lot more about something you're really passionate about. Perfect place to put it. A kid who has a YouTube video of something they've done that's really, really cool. They developed a robot and they want to show a video, a YouTube video of what the robot does. What a great place to put a link in there for an admission person to look at. You're absolutely correct from what some counselors say. You know, an admission officer who doesn't want to take the time to do it, that's a shame. But a school that's a quality school, I can vouch for the fact that in the Ivy Leagues of the schools that I know, they look at that last page.
And I'd hope so too, because I feel like I've seen students use this additional information space and talk about maybe like an undiagnosed learning difference that maybe affected their freshman year grades or sophomore year grades. And then, you know, once they got that corrected, like that was the reason why they went from like C's to A+, or they have done something, you know, really impressive, some project, passion project, community service project that is not necessarily who they are at like a DNA level. It's not really their personal statement, but it's something that they want to talk more about. That's also something that could go in this additional information essay. It's some significant experience that may not necessarily be like, again, tied to your DNA and who you are as a person, but it's just something that you have to share.
I had a student this year who was just, really advanced in sign language, but she loved music. And so she developed a video of her signing to a song and then created a choir of other people that were doing the same thing. What a cool video. I mean, those are the kinds of things that I think are really, really important in terms of what you can show.
So, Michael, one thing that is not yet in the Common App that will be coming is this COVID-19 essay.
Yep.
And I wanted to share this. When the Common App updates on like August 1st, you'll see it in the essay section that we were just in. But for right now, here it is on the Common Application website. And I'm going to read the question, and Michael would love to kind of hear your recommendations for how students should maybe kind of go, approach it. So the community disruptions of COVID-19 natural disasters can have deep and long-lasting impacts. If you need it, this space is yours to describe those impacts. Colleges care about the effects on your health and well-being, safety, family circumstances, future plans, and education, including access to reliable technology and quiet study spaces. Then there's 2 bullets. Do you wish to share anything on this topic? You have a choice, yes or no. And then please use the space to describe how these events have impacted you. It's going to be 250 words. Michael, what are you telling students about this?
Number 1, you answer this question.
Absolutely.
On the Common Application. And so do you want to share anything? No, you answer this question, because colleges are going to want to know how COVID-19 affected you and what you did during that period of time, because there's no guarantee that a student entering college in another year might have to have the same experience. And because of that, students who flourished with online learning really want to be able to talk about that, to show that. It's a perfect opportunity for someone who's an athlete to be able to talk about the fact that they lost their athletic season. They didn't have the chance to show what they were capable of showing, and they were hoping that this year they will have that opportunity. But I think it's absolutely critical in terms of that. Also remember that 2 other things. Your teachers are going to be able to talk about what you did during this period of time if they taught you in a situation where you had to do online learning. And the students who shined in that will be able to talk about how, I took this challenge and I really prospered in this challenge. It caused me to even go beyond the topic we were studying to learn more about that particular topic. I think that's important. But also know too, is that in the Common App section for the college counselor, they are being asked to answer how did their school deal with the COVID. In other words, they talk about that they had to do online teaching. They talk about perhaps if they had problems with technology or kids being able to find places to be able to operate. So what the school says as well will be very significant in the response to this question.
Nice. So the last part of the Common App that we'll take a look at is this. Not many schools really use it or require it, but there's a list of colleges that they ask you to actually submit your courses and grades. Chapman does it. University of Wisconsin-Madison does it. Ohio
State. Yep.
Anything to sort of say about that, Michael? Is that in the audio?
We were talking earlier about this, Chris. This is what the California system does. In the California system, which is a separate application, you can't use the Common Application for California, remember, you will have a section where you have to put in your courses, you have to put in your grades, you have to create that grid in the California application. So having this experience of doing it here may make it easier for you to do the California application in November, because their deadlines are going to be at the end of November. So section that, clearly, and if you just click the blue link, you can see all these different schools that will ask you to fill in this section. Okay. Yeah.
Right. So that's
Chris, one thing that's missed that I haven't seen. Where's the FERPA?
I'm going there right now, actually.
Okay, good. All right.
Yeah. So back over here to, we're going to now look at the college supplements. We're actually going to go back to the Common App, but just so when people watch the video, they know kind of what we're looking at here. So back over here to the Common App. So now coming over to the My Colleges. So I listed 3 colleges that I have a relationship with, Boston College, Harvard, Penn. And so if you go over, like, say, like to UPenn, all of these pages are the same for the most part, at least these like landing pages with contact information, website, whatever. You have their social media links. Again, Michael, I did that webinar, I think back on April 29th on how to research schools online. You should be like following these schools. Application deadlines, application information, whatever. And then you have the questions for the school. I listed that I was applying early decision to Penn. They have some other information here. You got to sign your agreement to go early decision. And then it's in here where they have recommendations and FERPA. And some people may use this platform. Some people may use Naviance. Michael, do you want to talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, but the key I want to talk about is on FERPA. The FERPA is basically that you're releasing the opportunity that you will not require that you want to see what people wrote about you. And I have to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's right. Your waiver.
From a college admission point of view, when I saw that a student didn't waive that right, that made me cautious that the admissions person was less reluctant to say something that they were afraid the student might see later on. I really appreciated the student who said, no, I trust my teachers, I trust my counselor, I believe they will say what they need to say about me. And I had much more confidence in recommendations that I read from students who had checked off the box that they released their ability to see these things. Just a caution that I would say, it's something that I've always believed, and I think most admissions people would agree with that.
And so one thing I want to point out, I'll use the Harvard application, is that if you go to the Harvard questions, despite the fact that all 3 schools I've listed here have like questions in their writing supplement, you want to go through these question sections as early as possible in your process, because there are writing prompts within these particular fields. Like, for example, here at Harvard, in their academic section, they have a prompt here about 150 words. Do you see? So my point is that, all the writing that you're going to do is not necessarily in the writing section. So make sure that you're, on the hunt for other prompts. And there are some schools where the prompts and the fields may not even open up until you choose a certain, say, academic program. Okay. So, like, for example, Michigan Ross School, if you choose that you're applying to Ross in Michigan, that's going to probably open up a Ross specific application essay that wouldn't be there if you didn't. I had a student literally 2 years ago who, yes, it was 90 minutes before the application was due, discovered that there is the application field there. And the essay got written, but had she done the research earlier, it wouldn't have been a problem. And then just back over here in the dashboard, you'll see here that, you have all your deadlines, and then you can also take a look at your application requirements in a grid view if you wanted to. Okay, you've got your institution types, your deadlines. See, the way that I have it done is I'm doing ED to Penn. I've got ED2 is Boston College, regular is Harvard. They have their rolling or regular decision dates, their application fees, and then just the different kind of parts of their other applications. So Michael, we're going to turn now just to...
Chris, let me say one more thing. A good example of what you just gave is at Cornell, where you have the 6 different colleges. Each of the colleges have their own supplemental essay that is different from the other colleges. So if you're applying to human ecology, you've got to write a very specific essay about why you want to go into the School of Human Ecology versus the student that's applying to the College of Arts and Science. So again, the more you get ahead of the game, the more you get done this summer on your top schools, the better you're going to be when September rolls around.
Yeah, and so to kind of tie everything together and kind of give you some next steps, here's your Common App checklist for the next few, well, right now, start brainstorming today. Again, the Common Application will update on August 1st. In my experience, you can open an account now. It won't be an issue if you qualify for the class of, say, 2021, but some people don't like taking the chance. That's fine. Open it up on a Word doc or Google Doc or a sheet, but start brainstorming all of these questions today, right? And then next, review your materials, review your transcript, review your test scores, review your resume. What stories are they telling? What stories do they all tell together? What do they not tell? Okay, what they're not telling might become the fodder for your personal statement or your other essays. When you get all that information up, connect the dots and develop your personal narrative. This is going to be your strategy for your application. And then ask, how can you tell your full story through the Common App as well as the supplemental essays, okay? Draft your essays, making the most of the available real estate. Remember, the personal essay or personal statement, it's 650 words. It's not a lot, right? Most students have like a 6,500 word essay. They try to get down to 650 words. So you got 650 there. You've got 250 for the COVID question, 250 for additional information. You may have, I think it's
250. You've got 650 words on that last page as well, too.
Yeah, exactly. And then additional information is also 650 if you want. So, are you making, do with the available real estate? And also supplemental essays at different schools might be 650, might be 400, might be 250, okay? Also, by the way, even though you can't look at like this year's essays on the Common App for schools, most schools have published them. So you can go to Boston College and get like your 2020, 2021 essays now, even though they're not on the Common App. And then finally, once you put this whole thing together, get feedback. Does your story resonate with the reader? Are they getting the story that you want to be telling, right? This is an iterative process. It's cyclical. You want to try and create draft, feedback, and then keep enriching the story so you're telling the story that you want to tell and it's having the impact you want it to have.
I know when I start working with students, I ask them to tell me your story. Start telling me all the things you can tell me about you. And I start to look for a common theme. I look for a link. I look for the way to put this together. So back to your idea of making sure you're running this by somebody, make sure you're running it by somebody who gets the concept of who you are and how to present it in your application. Right,
got it. All right, so Michael, a couple of questions here. So question here from Henry. Don't we need to import our SSN for the FAFSA and AID?
That would be on the actual form. That would not be on there's no reason to put it on your common application. You would have to put it into your FAFSA. You're correct, yes.
Right, exactly. And then,
for example, a student not applying for aid doesn't need to put their social security number into the application anywhere. Okay.
Right, exactly. Another question here. If you're a student taking 2 advanced languages, but you don't intend to be a language major in college, do you list those advanced languages as your most rigorous?
Interesting question. I think a lot of it is what they do intend to do in college that their application supports. So in other words, if they're going into another major, what's the other things in the application that talk to that? And that you perhaps can blend in how someone who wants to go into business, who's taken 2 languages, can talk about having the value of these 2 languages in terms of how it would help them in their business career down the road. So think about, again, it's the big picture, how you blend things in, and obviously a course of quality should be high up on the list, yes.
All right. Another question here that I accidentally answered without answering. What if you're at a New York City private school which doesn't participate in competitions, like the history competition and so on? How do you fill out the honors section?
Again, as I said before, for a lot of students, it may be hard for them to get 5 honors. So a lot of it is going to be National Honor Society is 1 honor, okay? That should be in there. Things that they have at the school where they have had success, those are things that are, important. Sometimes it's getting into the advanced track of an academic course at a particular school, that there's a challenge that you have to get into that as well too. So, you need to think about how creative you can be in that section, even at a school that doesn't do a lot of things like honors. Yeah.
Nice. Just for those who are asking, yes, the recording of this will be shared out later this week. The slideshow will not be available, but you'll have the access to the recording. Then a question here from James. Michael said earlier that if someone has not taken Calc BC, they wouldn't be considered for Cornell Engineering. Does it mean someone who has only taken Calc AB, is that a huge disadvantage for Cornell Engineering?
If your school offers AB and not BC, you will not be penalized. If your school offers BC, there's going to be an expectation that you've gone all the way to challenge yourself in BC. Now, unfortunately, I've had conversations with Cornell about that, and they're looking at kids and they're, The selectivity is so hard to get into the Cornell engineering program. Don't put yourself at a disadvantage. If you can move up to BC Calculus, take BC Calculus.
Questions here in the chat thread here from Patricia. What section to do, add a link to build an app? Education progression. I have a student who is doing an Eagle project during COVID-19 where they would add that link to the application. So I'd say two things. Number one, like Michael said, they could do it in the additional information. However, schools also allow you to submit a portfolio either through Slide Room or through their own portal. That's a school by school. That information is actually on the Common App, and you can access it there, or you can put it in the additional information section. I wouldn't put it into education progression unless they've changed. Michael, anything to add to that? Or
no, I think that's exactly right. I think that's, the way to put it is in the back, but also put it in part of your COVID answer. Okay, in your 250-word answer, talk about that in terms of something that you were able to continue to do in spite of COVID. That makes a student stand out.
Nice. And then something here from Audrey. Should I write about what major I want to go into and why? I'll say that quickly. Most schools will ask you a question like that. Okay. So like, for example, at University of Pennsylvania, they're going to ask you the why Penn essay. They're going to ask you about how you intend to pursue your education at Penn. So you'd write it there. That's going to probably be in the school specific supplements. Michael, yes?
Absolutely. And it's a great opportunity to also show the school, this particular school, how much you know about that school. In other words, to be able to talk about, I saw this incredible research by Professor so-and-so and had the chance to read it. And it's so exciting to think that I might have the chance to study with that person or to take one of his classes. So those are places where you could definitely want to kind of let the college know that you really know their school well.
Another question here, Michael. Can I talk about my experience of gardening outside of school for my home community in the activities section? For instance, how to create a more sustainable life through gardening on a rooftop? Totally.
Absolutely, no question on that. And maybe a place to expand upon it, back to what you said before. You've only got 150 characters. If you really want to talk about it in terms of, greening the world, put that into the back page in terms of that section where you have opportunities to add more. Yeah.
Another question here. My school doesn't provide any honors. There are no honor societies either. Should I mention it in the additional information, or is that just useless whining, Michael?
No, I think that, I was a firm believer that if a school didn't offer AP classes, I can't penalize a kid for not having AP classes. Mm-hmm. If a school doesn't offer different types of honors, I can't penalize a kid for that situation. It's making the most of what your school offers. If your school offers challenging courses and you want to show that, take challenging courses. But if a school doesn't have those situations, you should be graded and measured on doing the best you can in what you're offered at your particular school.
And to add to that, unless you're coming from a brand new high school, which is quite possible, admissions will probably know what your school profile includes, and they will know that you didn't have a chance to take those courses, or didn't have access to any honors of any sort. So they're going to know, again, that the whole topic here is context. They're going to understand your context.
What's important, Chris, you just said that, and a lot of students don't realize that. When the school submits your recommendation, they submit what's called the school profile. And what the school profile is for the admission office to put the school in context. There are a lot of schools that admissions offices know very well, it's not as important. But if you're a new school or a school that's the first time they're sending students to a particular school, if all of a sudden you look in there and you see the school doesn't offer APs. Okay, the kid's not going to have any APs on their transcript. But if the school offers 20 APs and you have hardly taken any at all, then that would be an indication that you haven't challenged yourself in the curriculum of the school.
Right. Question here, if you're a rising junior, do you recommend trying to take the SAT or ACT this summer in case there's a second wave of the virus and centers are closed or test dates canceled? Also, how important is it to take subject tests and how many? I'll answer this quickly. Honestly, do the world and the universe a favor and let the rising seniors take their exams. They need them more than you do. So I would say if you have the option to, let other students take the exam. That said, if you do take it, I do think it's smart in case there is a second wave. And so at least you have that sort of attended to. As far as subject tests, I mean, the only schools that really care about subject tests are the engineering schools. And they're, MIT, if you were on this call earlier, has said we are no longer looking at them. If you even send them, we will not consider them. So I'd say that's not important.
Yeah.
Also, Caltech is also not looking at them. Michael, anything you want to add to that?
The issue here is, a lot of students have older brothers and older sisters who went through this process when all the Ivy League schools required 2 subject tests. Georgetown required 3 subject tests. That's not the issue anymore. I hate to take business away from the College Board, but subject tests just aren't that important anymore. Okay, so no. APs, on the other hand, stick with those.
I went to the SAT in August, but I have no fee waivers nor an active guidance counselor. Is there any way to get one? Sure, you can reach out to either to Michael or me. We're happy to sort of help you out with that, with the fee waivers and the active guidance counseling.
Yeah, I mean the key on that is the College Board has to approve you. So, you have to show the College Board that you qualify for a fee waiver. Yes.
Right. There's a couple of other questions, Michael, that came in during the chat thread, but we're kind of going a bit over given our large agenda, but we did it. So what I'll do is I'll simply go back to our slides here and kind of get to the end. So of course, thank you for attending, and especially as application season is now upon us, we're now offering webinar attendees, you can save 50% on a 2-hour admission strategy session. What does that mean? Maybe designing a list of school that aligns with your career goals, crafting your application narrative to find your hook, creating an admission strategy for a particular school, get feedback on your essays and application materials, discuss any other questions with an admissions expert. You can do that either through me or Michael by contacting the CATES team, info@catescreen.com, or calling us at our New York office, +1 212 359 4208, and mention the code EDGE50. Again, EDGE50 gets you half off this 2-hour strategy session. And if you're a school representative and want to bring one of us in to talk to a group of students, that is also totally cool. We will honor the promotion there as well. So again, if you want to get in touch with us, here is our contact information. Michael, what's the one thing that people should take away from today's webinar on how to navigate the Common App during COVID-19?
Think about what your story is. Think about how you create the narrative of that story. Don't be shy in creating that narrative. Put everything in there you can to make sure the school gets the most complete picture of who you are, where you are now, and where you hope to be.
And with that, thank you everyone. I couldn't have said it better myself. Michael, thank you again for your time. And to everyone else, be well, be safe, and let's get it. Take care.